The tree looked ordinary in the fading light. Just another old oak standing at the edge of the yard, its branches dark against the last traces of evening. A few minutes earlier, the air had still been alive with movement, small birds shifting through the leaves, the distant call of something returning home before night settled in. But now the feeder sat untouched. The fence line was empty. Even the wind seemed quieter than before. Somewhere above, hidden among the highest limbs, an owl landed without a sound. You would have missed it if you had blinked. One moment there was only darkness between the branches. The next, there was a presence. Still, watching, waiting. The owl remained there for a while, motionless against the deepening sky. Then, slowly, it moved toward a hollow in the trunk, a narrow opening no wider than a dinner plate. And just like that, it disappeared. The tree swallowed it. The yard grew even quieter. You know the feeling, that strange moment when a place suddenly feels different, though nothing obvious has changed. The porch light glows exactly where it always does. The grass looks the same. The shadows stretch across the ground the way they have every evening before. Yet something about the scene feels deeper now, as if the night has crossed an invisible threshold. If you're new here, subscribe before you leave, because what you're about to discover may change the way you look at every tree after dark. Most people think the story ends when the birds go to sleep. They imagine the branches becoming empty, the tree becoming still. But that assumption hides something remarkable, because the moment the owl vanished into the darkness of that hollow, something else quietly began. And what happens next is taking place inside that tree every single night, whether anyone is there to witness it or not. Maybe you have felt it before. Not in a forest deep in the mountains, not on some remote trail far from home. Just in an ordinary place. A backyard. A quiet neighborhood street. A familiar patch of trees you have passed 100 times without thinking. Then one evening, something felt different. You slowed down without knowing why. Your eyes drifted toward a particular tree. Nothing moved. No branches swayed. No sound called your attention there. And yet, for a moment, you found yourself looking longer than usual. Most people dismiss these moments almost immediately. They tell themselves it was nothing, a random thought, a trick of the light, the imagination filling in empty spaces after dark. But the feeling lingers. Not fear, not exactly curiosity either. Something quieter than that. A sense that the night contains more than what is visible. You may remember standing on a porch after sunset while the last traces of daylight faded from the sky. The neighborhood growing still. The distant sound of a car disappearing around a corner. Leaves barely moving in the evening air. And somewhere nearby, an old tree standing completely motionless, yet it never felt empty. That is the strange part. Some places seem to hold a presence even when they appear silent. Perhaps that is why people have always attached stories to old trees. Why certain corners of a yard feel different after dark than they do at noon. Why we sometimes pause without understanding what made us stop. The truth is, most of us have experienced moments like this. We simply do not talk about them very often. And that feeling you get when the world appears still but somehow not asleep. That feeling may be closer to reality than you realize. Because while everything around that old tree seemed quiet from the outside, something inside it had already begun to stir. From a distance, the tree appeared unchanged. Its trunk stood in the same place it had stood for decades. Its branches stretched into the darkness exactly as they had the night before. To anyone looking through a kitchen window, it would seem as though nothing at all was happening. But that is often how hidden worlds begin. Not with a dramatic event. Not with a sudden revelation. Simply with the realization that something ordinary is not as empty as it seems. If you could remain there long enough, standing quietly beneath the night sky, you might begin to notice small details. A faint movement along the bark. A tiny shadow slipping into a crack no wider than a finger. The brief shimmer of wings catching a strand of moonlight before disappearing again. Most people never see these things because they happen in the spaces between attention, in the moments when the mind assumes there is nothing worth noticing. But the tree is full of openings. Beneath loose sections of bark. Inside old woodpecker cavities. Along narrow channels, carved by time and weather. Entire pathways exist there, hidden from view. And as darkness settles deeper across the yard, those pathways begin to fill, one by one, quietly, deliberately. What seemed like a single tree starts to feel more like an apartment building with countless unseen residents. Some emerge only after sunset. Others have been there all day, waiting for cooler air, and softer light. The remarkable thing is not that these creatures exist. It is that they have always been there, night after night, year after year, living entire lives only inches from places we pass every day. And this is where the illusion begins to break. Because once you realize how much activity can hide inside something that appears completely still, you start wondering what else you have been overlooking all this time. What makes all of this so remarkable is that none of it requires imagination. Researchers who study old trees often describe them less as individual plants and more as living structures that support entire communities. A single mature oak can contain thousands of tiny spaces invisible from the ground, cavities formed by age, pockets beneath loose bark, narrow chambers created by years of growth and weather. To us, they appear insignificant. To the creatures that depend on them, they are shelter, pathways, and homes. That is why the first movements of the night often begin long before most people notice. As temperatures drop by only a few degrees, activity inside those hidden spaces starts to change. Small insects emerge from cracks where they remained motionless throughout the heat of the day. Tiny creatures that spend daylight hours conserving energy begin moving through the darkness with surprising precision. Even the air itself shifts. Scientists have found that old tree cavities often create stable microclimates, holding moisture and temperature differently than the world outside. In a way, the tree becomes its own environment, its own small world. And perhaps that explains something many people sense without knowing why. When you stand near a place that contains so much unseen life, your mind notices patterns your conscious thoughts never fully process. A faint rustle, a subtle vibration through the bark, a movement at the edge of vision. Nothing dramatic, nothing supernatural, just countless small signals blending together into a feeling that something is present, something active, something awake. The science does not diminish the mystery. If anything, it deepens it. Because the more we learn about these hidden communities, the more extraordinary they seem. And this is where the night begins to reveal something even stranger. The tree is no longer simply holding life inside it. It is starting to move with a rhythm all its own. After a while, something unexpected begins to happen. You stop seeing the night as a backdrop and start noticing its routines. The same branch catches the moonlight at the same angle. The same opening in the bark disappears into shadow every evening. The same hollow where the owl vanished now feels familiar, almost like the front door of a house you pass every day. And once that familiarity settles in, the details become harder to ignore. A tiny movement near the base of the trunk, a soft flutter somewhere above eye level, the faint rustle of leaves when there is barely enough wind to move them. None of these moments seem important on their own, yet together they begin forming a pattern. The way small lights scattered across a distant hillside eventually reveal an entire town. You find yourself looking a little longer each night. Not because you expect something dramatic to happen, but because the place no longer feels empty. It feels inhabited. The owl remains hidden somewhere inside, unseen but somehow present. And around it, life continues flowing through corridors and chambers concealed within the wood. What is remarkable is how quickly a connection forms once you begin paying attention. The tree becomes less like an object and more like a neighbor. Quiet, familiar, consistent. It is there on evenings when the air is warm and still. It is there when rain clouds drift overhead. It is there beneath clear skies filled with stars. Always standing in the same place while countless unseen lives move through it. Perhaps that is why certain places stay with us. Not because they speak, not because they demand attention, but because over time, they begin to feel like they are sharing something. And the longer you watch, the more it seems as though the night itself is inviting you closer. The longer you sit with that thought, the stranger it becomes. Because what is unfolding inside those weathered walls is not a collection of separate lives. It is a network, a living rhythm made of countless small connections. The insect moving beneath the bark responds to changes in temperature. Moisture gathers in hidden pockets of wood. Fungi spread quietly through places no sunlight reaches. Tiny creatures follow pathways that existed long before the owl ever arrived. Each movement influences another. Each presence becomes part of something larger. From the outside, the trunk appears solid and unmoving. But inside, an entire world is adjusting itself moment by moment. It is easy to think of a tree as a single living thing. Yet on nights like this, it feels more like a landscape, a mountain, a city, a place where dozens of stories unfold simultaneously beyond human sight. and the owl remains somewhere within it all, hidden behind layers of bark and shadow, not controlling this world, simply existing within it, one resident among many. There is something unexpectedly humbling about that realization. We often imagine ourselves standing outside nature, observing it from a distance. But nights like this suggest something different. They remind us that life is constantly happening beyond the limits of our attention. Entire communities carrying on their routines while we remain unaware. The world is not empty when we stop looking. If anything, it becomes even more alive. And perhaps that is why old trees have inspired wonder for generations. Not because they conceal secrets in the dramatic sense, but because they quietly reveal a deeper truth, that every familiar place contains more life, more complexity, and more meaning than we first assume. Yet the most fascinating part has nothing to do with what is happening inside the wood. It has to do with why some people seem to sense it before they ever see it. Perhaps this is where the story becomes more personal, not because the night changes, but because the way you see it begins to change. Many people believe there are certain places that seem to carry a presence after dark. Not a presence that can be measured or photographed, but something quieter than that. A feeling, a sense of awareness, an impression that a familiar place contains more than its visible form. Scientists might say that the human brain is remarkably sensitive to patterns. That long before conscious thought catches up, we are already processing sounds, movements, and subtle environmental cues. And there is truth in that. But something about this feels difficult to ignore. The feeling often arrives before any explanation does. You notice it when the air grows still, when the moonlight settles across the bark, when the yard falls silent and your attention drifts toward a particular corner of the darkness. Not because anything extraordinary has happened, simply because something feels different. Over the years, people have attached countless meanings to old trees. Some saw them as places of wisdom. Others believed they stood as silent witnesses to generations passing beneath their branches. Whether those beliefs were spiritual, symbolic, or simply human attempts to describe wonder, they all seem to circle the same idea. Certain places invite reflection in ways that are difficult to explain. Standing there now, looking toward the hollow where the owl disappeared hours ago, it becomes easier to understand why. The hidden lives inside remain invisible. The quiet movements continue beyond sight, yet somehow the entire place feels more alive than it did before. And the strange thing is that once you begin sensing that hidden depth, it becomes almost impossible to look at the night the same way again. Because the question is no longer what is happening inside that place. The question is why some part of you seemed to know it was there all along. Eventually, the need for answers begins to fade. You stop trying to identify every sound. You stop searching every shadow for movement. The night no longer feels like a puzzle waiting to be solved. It feels like something to sit with. The yard has grown quiet again. A faint silver glow rests along the upper branches. The leaves barely move. Somewhere beyond the houses, a distant breeze passes through trees you cannot see. And for a moment, everything seems perfectly still. Yet now you understand that stillness differently. What once appeared empty now feels full. What once seemed silent now feels layered with life. Not because anything dramatic revealed itself, but because your attention changed. The hollow where the owl disappeared remains hidden in darkness. The countless pathways within the wood remain invisible. The small lives moving through that world continue unnoticed by almost everyone. And somehow that makes it more beautiful. There is comfort in realizing that the world does not depend on our awareness to be alive. That entire communities can exist beyond our sight. That meaning can be present even when it is not obvious. Standing there beneath the stars, it becomes easier to understand why moments of wonder often arrive quietly. Not through extraordinary events, but through ordinary things seen more deeply. An old trunk, a patch of moonlight, a familiar corner of a yard after dark. Things that seemed simple until you paused long enough to notice them. And perhaps that is what lingers most. Not the hidden creatures, not the unseen chambers, but the realization that the world contains far more depth than we usually allow ourselves to see. The night has not changed. The tree has not changed. Yet something inside you feels slightly different now. A little slower, a little quieter, a little more willing to believe that even the most familiar places still hold mysteries worth sitting with. By the time the first light begins to appear along the horizon, the night is already changing. The stars grow softer. The shadows lose their sharp edges. A pale gray glow settles across the yard where darkness stood only moments before. From a distance, everything looks ordinary again. The old oak stands exactly where it always has. The branches stretch into the morning sky. The hollow is hidden once more among folds of bark and weathered wood. Soon, the world will wake up. Doors will open. Cars will pass. People will move through their routines without giving the tree a second thought. And yet something remarkable has already happened. Throughout the night, an entire hidden world carried on unseen. Lives moved through silent corridors. Tiny journeys unfolded beneath bark and inside forgotten chambers. The owl remained somewhere within that quiet community until the darkness slowly released its hold. Most people will never witness any of it. But perhaps that is not the point. Perhaps the value of these hidden worlds is not that we see them. Perhaps it is simply knowing they exist. Knowing that life continues beyond the edges of our attention. Knowing that mystery still survives in places we thought we understood. Thank you for staying until the very end and sharing this quiet journey. If stories like this speak to something in you, consider subscribing before you leave, because there are still countless corners of the natural world waiting to be noticed. Countless ordinary things that become extraordinary the moment we truly look. And maybe that is the thought worth carrying with you tonight. Somewhere outside your window, beneath a roofline, inside an old tree, or hidden among familiar shadows, a world may be unfolding at this very moment. Maybe it was only a tree, but somehow, it never felt like only a tree.